So turning back to kind of the beginnings of the process, you mentioned it takes time. And I think a lot of larger states or population centers, it's delay. California can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months before you get your first time in front of a judge. Um, what does the initial, so you file for custody and you go into court, what does that initial hearing look like in Pennsylvania?
Well, in Pennsylvania, every county has their own local rules. So I'm in the Philadelphia area and I practice in the Philadelphia and the surrounding suburbs. So every court is different. If you're in the county I'm in, which is in Bucks, you're going to go to a conference and you'll probably get there maybe in 6 weeks. And if it's an emergency, you might get there in 3. But if you're in Philadelphia, good luck. You might be waiting 11 months before you're in court. It's just they have so much volume that it's really difficult. And then every court is different. You might not go. You might go to mediation. In Montgomery County, you're required to go to mediation and meet with a mediator. So every little county is different. But generally, you'll go to a lower level proceeding first and see if you can work out an agreement. And then after you go through that process, then you would get scheduled in front of a judge. And a judge can enter an order, but you might have to go through a counseling process with a recommendation on custody by a psychologist before you even get to the judge. So that's why I said it can take a really long time to get through the court process. And the things you agree to in the interim in a temporary order, even though it's temporary and without prejudice, it can set a precedent. Because by the time you get to court, it's a year later, and a court might not want to disrupt the schedule of the child at that point. So sometimes it's better to not just agree to some temporary order and let the judge decide the temporary until you can get through the full process if you're going to sell yourself short.
Yeah, that's definitely out here. We have it's not even in LA County; it's San Bernardino County. It takes 6 to 7 months to get to mediation, and 7 to 8 months to get in front of a judge. So if a dad comes in and there's not a custody order in place, what would be some and I think not an uncommon situation is moms restricting access or limiting it to certain times. What type of advice would you give to a parent who's maybe struggling through having limited access during that prolonged lead up to being in court?
Well, what I tell my clients is to make sure they have a good support system, family and friends, because it is a long struggle. And I would also tell them not to agree to anything in writing. So it's going to be hard. And you reach out to the other side to try to get contact, but you don't want to agree to anything in writing, because once you do, it's harder for the court then to hear your case because you've got something temporary. And it's, if you don't have something in writing, you have a greater chance of getting a judge to enter a fair order while you're going through the process. So it's really hard for the people that aren't seeing their children because they're at the most risk to take anything. And they're going to take, maybe a night when they could have got 50-50 if they just waited, the 6 weeks to get in front of, if you're not seeing your child at all, they will send it to a judge at some point. So you might go to that conference, but then they'll get you in front of a judge. And you might get a lot more if you just bide the time. So giving up that 6 weeks and not seeing your child in the long run will be better for you than taking in writing, a night or two or whatever little bit that they offer you. So it's really, it's kind of a game in a sense, which is sad, but you got to be in it for the long haul, and you can't sell yourself short, and you can't put it in writing. That's what I tell them. You got to look, in a year or 2 years, how are you going to feel when you have 50-50? Don't just take a night because that's all that's being offered and you're in pain and you haven't seen your child. Because in the long run, in a year from now, you might only have that day because you can't get the court. But if somebody's completely withholding, they'll get you in court sooner for a temporary order.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the biggest struggle out here is in California, the way we do the domestic violence side of things is that you file and the judge either grants a temporary or denies the temporary. Very, very low bar to get a temporary granted. But if you get it granted, you may not be able to see your kids for 3 to 4 weeks. You get a hearing within 30 days, but that might be the most challenging 30 days of someone's life. Is out of nowhere, the courts say you're not allowed to see your kids. And I think the support system thing is a huge deal. I tell my clients one of two things needs to occur. Number one is you need to go get a therapist. You need to have someone to talk to weekly. Or number two, you need to get someone you completely trust and say, I'm about to go through a lot. I'm going to share everything with you. Are you okay with me venting to you about the situation? Because a lot of times the parents who don't do one of those two things end up venting towards their co-parent. Let's say there's struggles in the parenting relationship, or they have one explosion where you send off nasty text messages, you call them a dozen times, you end up with the PFA, you end up with the domestic violence restraining order, and it's an uphill battle.